Ladies and gentlemen, the First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Michelle Obama, accompanied by 9-time Grammy Award winner John Legend, Motown legend, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and Lifetime Achievement recipient Smokey Robinson, the man who created Hitsville, USA, Motown founder Barry Gordy, and executive director of the Grammy Museum, Robert Santelli.
Well, isn't this exciting? Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, hello, everyone. It is great to have you all here today. This is really good. Let me start by recognizing the 3 or 4 gentlemen who have joined me on stage. Our dear friend John Legend, who has just been amazing in so many ways. Mr. Smokey Robinson, who needs no introduction, who has been such a dear friend. Mr. Barry Gordy, who just is. And Mr. Bob Santelli from the Grammy Museum, who's going to get us started. Thank you. Thank you all so much. It means so much to us. I know it means so much to all these students to have you here to spend this kind of quality time. This doesn't happen often. You do realize that. Not only getting these gentlemen on the stage together, but the fact that you all have this kind of access, and you're sitting where? In the White House. That's something else. But of course, I want to thank all of you, all the students, for coming out today. I'm excited because you all are coming from all over the country, from schools all over the country, and of course from my hometown, Chicago. We've got some of my neighborhood schools. We got DuSable and Kenwood and Hyde Park. I'm not going to go into it because I'm going to leave out a few, but we are so excited to have you all here. And I also understand that you're going to get to stay a little bit and see some of the performance as well. So hopefully this is an exciting visit to Washington for you. It is a thrill for us to have you here. When we moved to this house a couple of years ago, we wanted to open these doors as wide as we could, especially for young people like you. And this music series is one of the ways that we're doing that. We have held workshops for all different types of music, classical, country. We've done some jazz, we've done some Broadway. We've even done some music from the Civil Rights Movement. We did that last February for Black History Month. It was a wonderful event. And we did something for modern dance, so we're starting to move into other genres as well. We do all this because we believe that the People's House shouldn't be just a nickname. We believe that prime ministers and VIPs shouldn't be the only ones who feel comfortable walking through these doors. We feel that everyone should feel like they belong here, sitting right here in the state dining room. And I hope you realize through this experience that no one here is any different than you all are. Whether that's Smokey Robinson or John Legend or me or my husband, because we are all reflected in you. We see ourselves in you. I say that all the time when I am talking to young people. We were all sitting where you were at some point in time. If you can believe that. We were teenagers once. Not so fun. We were. We went to some of the same high schools that you all did. We went to schools like you. We carried around backpacks. We didn't have computers and iPods, but you know, we talked to each other on the phone every now and then. We had to dial with the rotary dial, but things were a little different. But we liked to hang out with our friends. We were into music. You know, I even used to know what the latest dances were and taught my brother. I don't know that now, but we had homework to do, and sometimes our parents embarrassed us like we now embarrass our children. And growing up, we all had our own dreams. And that's what today is about. It's about the dreams of kids who grew up knowing that they had a song to sing and that everyone will want to hear that song And it all started with Mr. Gordy. In 1960, he was a young man in Detroit with a great idea. He wanted to be one of the very first African Americans to own a record label. So he got an $800 loan from his family. They owe you big time, right? And started recording music out of his apartment. And soon he bought a house to record from, and it became home to some of the most popular musicians in the country, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations, the Supremes, the Jackson 5, the Four Tops, Marvin Gaye, Gladys Knight, and the Supremes. The Gladys Knight will be here soon as well. And one of my personal favorites, I say this all the time, who's my favorite? Stevie Wonder, yes indeed. And as Motown rose, so did the forces of change in this country. During that time, it was the time of King and Kennedy. It was the time of marches and rallies and groundbreaking civil rights laws. And Motown's music was so much more than just a soundtrack. It was a heartbeat. As one of the members of the Four Tops once said, back in the 60s, when we weren't allowed to go certain places, our music crept into people's homes, into their living rooms, their kitchens, their cars. Motown helped pave the way for people in this country to look at one another a little differently. Because something changed when little girls all across the country saw Diana Ross on the Ed Sullivan Show. There was a change that happened. Something changed when teenagers turned up the volume on the Temptations song, no matter where they lived, in Birmingham or Boston, in Detroit or Denver. Motown made music for all people, no matter what you look like, no matter where you came from. And that is why we are so proud, my husband and I, to share Motown's story as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. See, the people that we're going to be talking about, that we're going to hear from, that we're going to listen to, the songs, the music, these are true trailblazers. Because as you know, there wouldn't be an Usher if there wasn't a Smokey Robinson. You know, there wouldn't be an Alicia Keys without a Gladys Knight. But the thing that I want you all to remember is that nobody's name is printed on the Billboard Top 10 at birth. Nobody is born into this. Neither Mr. Gordy nor Smokey Robinson were born into greatness or wealth. Diana Ross grew up in a housing project. And John Legend is the son of a seamstress and a factory worker. And they're good people. But they've shown us that with enough hard work and a willingness to take some risks, anyone can make it. And this isn't just true for careers in entertainment or sports. The Motown story is really a metaphor for life. So whatever your passions are, whether it's business or law or science, teaching, social services, with dedication and focus, there is truly nothing that you all can't do. And if you ever doubt that, just look up on this stage for a second and remember what you can do. So what I'm asking you all to do now is to really take full advantage of this opportunity, because I'm going to turn the stage over to these individuals who are going to make themselves available to you. So I want you all to ask questions. You don't seem like a shy bunch, so, but take full advantage, ask questions, and find out about how they reached their dreams so that you can figure out some strategies for reaching yours. Don't be shy, ignore the cameras. Hopefully, I don't know if they're leaving or not, but if they stay, just ignore them. And make sure you get all that you can from these men. And I'm gonna leave because I got other stuff to do. But I am so grateful to all of you for taking the time, not just to be here this evening, but doing this, because this is really what it's all about. It's not this evening's performance, it's what's gonna happen in this room right now that makes this program so special. So thank you all, and I want to introduce the man who's going to get us started, Mr. Bob Santelli, who's the Executive Director of the Grammy Museum, and I will see you guys doing great things, right? All right, thank you. Have fun.
Well, first of all, I'd like to especially thank the First Lady for the opportunity for the Grammy Museum to return to the White House. We were here last year celebrating the music of the Civil Rights era, and Smokey was also part of that at the time, a very important time for a very young museum, the Grammy Museum. And I also want to thank our museum colleagues who are here today, the Motown Historical Museum here, who have brought some artifacts, some great Motown artifacts for you to look at after this little talk is over. And most importantly, I'd like to thank my guests, people who have made music history in this country and who are the kind of people that you are going to hear from today that made this history in such a way that 50, 60 years after the fact, it is still as meaningful today as it was when I was a young boy listening to this music for the first time. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to give you some sort of historical context so we can kind of set the stage so that when we do turn it over for questions from Mr. Gordy, Mr. Legend, and Mr. Robinson, that you'll have a sense of history. And then ask the kind of questions, as the First Lady said, that are meaningful, that are important, because you get one chance to sit with these men of American music history. It's an honor for me to be on the stage with them, just like it's an honor for you to be in this audience. So think about the questions that you'll ask, and we'll start that shortly. But first this. Let's go back to your mother's, maybe even grandparents' time, okay, back into the late 1950s, when America was a very, very different country than it is today. Start off, right off the bat, we are a segregated country. We are a country of African Americans and a country of whites, and rarely did the two connect. It's a sad part of American history, but the good news is it's about to be changed in this little history story that I'm about to tell you. In the late 1950s, when Mr. Gordy and Mr. Robinson are in Detroit thinking about a dream that they shared, America is about to undergo a vast transformation. John F. Kennedy is elected president in 1960 and has this whole sense of promise and youth about him that gives a great sense of encouragement to young people in America. And also, we are at the dawning of the civil rights movement, one of the greatest social, political, cultural movements that this country has ever experienced. So, up in Detroit in 1959 and 1960, it's the perfect setting for history to be made. Because if we shift our interest and in our attention to Detroit, where Mr. Gordy is working, he's an auto worker on the automotive plants at the assembly line. He's a former boxer. He's a struggling songwriter. Actually, he writes a song called Reet Petite that your grandparents, I'm sure, would know, that was sung by the great Jackie Wilson. But there is a sense of destiny about him because, as you heard the First Lady say, he borrows money from his family to create something that rarely happened in American music history up to this point. An African American actually owning a record company and securing the destiny of the artist that he would ultimately bring into his record company. That didn't happen a whole lot. There were other African-American men who had small record companies, but very, very difficult to make it and break in segregated America. It doesn't bother Barry. What he does is he sets out to hone in on this incredible talent that is in the surrounding blocks of West Grand Boulevard, where he lives and where Motown would be born. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why Detroit? Why not? Detroit is a city full of amateur talent, and I'm sure when we ask the questions, Mr. Gordy and Mr. Robinson will allude to some of the dances and the things going on in the streets and at parties and socials where this incredible talent was just brewing, waiting to be discovered. But in short order, Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, they come to the forefront and they begin this label, Motown. And what happens is they begin to sign the local talent. So in short order, in the early 1960s, for the very first time, young teens across the country, white and black, begin to hear the names of the Miracles, of which Smokey is a member. We begin to hear the Temptations, the Four Tops, little Stevie Wonder, because when he's discovered, he's 11 years old. 11 years old. Such was the talent there. But I have to say something, as a music historian, in most African-American urban communities in the early 1960s, there was lots of talent, not a lot of opportunity. So the fact that Motown is born not just brings in the talent from Detroit and begins to record it, but gives encouragement to young blacks all across America, in Los Angeles, New York, Newark, Cleveland, all over the place, that there's a possibility of a promise to make great music and to be recognized for it. In the early 1960s, there's also something else happening here. When I grow up, it's called Beatlemania, because in 1964, the Beatles come from England, and they come across America, and they literally take America by storm. There's nothing any kid is talking about. And it looked like for a long time that our American music was just going to be taken over by Brits. Well, the answer to the Beatles was Motown. There were others as well. There was the group called the Beach Boys out in Los Angeles creating great music just as much. But the real answer was Motown. And I know that because in interviews with the Beatles and other members of what was then called the British Invasion, they would always say to me, I'd say, well, who were your influence? Oh, Motown, of course, Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, the Temptations, the Four Tops. So even though they were British, they were gaining their musical inspiration from Detroit and Motown, taking it, putting it into their music, and then giving it back to us young Americans. So even in the British invasion, even with the connection to the Beatles, the Motown story is embedded into that legacy. By the time we get into the mid-1960s, this country is undergoing vast transformation. We are in the thick of the civil rights movement. And Motown is so important to young people, black and white, because what we find out during this time is that Motown is a symbol of black pride and black capitalism, that you could take an idea and with great strength and courage and conviction, you can turn that idea and that dream into a reality. And all you have to do, I'm not going to go through this now, all you have to do is just start listening and looking at the amount of songs and the number of groups that recorded under the Motown label. And again, we'll talk about this in just a couple of minutes. It's astonishing. People always ask me at the Grammy Museum, they say, well, what made, so, there's a lot of great music in American history. What made the Motown sound so great? I can only give you my opinion, and shortly we'll hear from the men who made it. But my opinion, it sounded so great on a car radio. Okay, because when you were 16 or 17 years old, and I want to ask you guys, I'm going to ask, did you guys put that in mind? Because you would turn on the car radio and had this little single speaker, as tinny as anything. It was now terrible sound, but back then it was like our portable, Walkman or our portable iPod or whatever it was. But the fact of the matter is, it sounded great. When Martha and the Vandellas sang Heat Wave or Dancing in the Street, or Smokey sang Tears of a Clown or Tracks of My Tears, it sounded great. Now, as a historian, I go back and say, well, why did that happen other than the car radio? It's because they had a commitment to, I think, musical detail that is inspiring, where Mr. Gordy, Mr. Robinson used some of the greatest musicians to create a consistency of sound. So even though you had different artists, Marvin Gaye, Temptations, Four Tops, Martha and the Vandellas, it didn't matter. There were great songwriters and a great backing band, not to mention a great sound that they created in the studios where they all recorded. So it was almost like a perfect storm of music. All of these things got into place in a perfect way that created impeccable, perfect American pop music. By the late 1960s, things have really changed in this country. There's all kinds of other music going on as well. And the most important thing about American popular music is its ability to change and commit itself to the times. There's a big difference between 1962 and 1968 and 1969. In 1968 alone, Martin Luther King is assassinated. Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. We are rioting in the streets. It is a difficult place to be in America. And once again, the thing that holds us together, or at least helps us hold us together, is music. And where do we return to? We turn to Motown. And Motown sound is evolving and changing too. Because now, instead of simply singing about dancing in the street, or I second that emotion, or whatever it might be, you have a situation where you're singing about Ball of Confusion, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, songs with a lot of integrity and reflecting what was happening in America socially, politically, and racially. Finally, by the early 1970s, one of the greatest albums of all time. You look at any music historian's top 10 albums of all time, you're going to find Marvin Gaye on that list. This man and the records that were made in the early 1970s, once Motown Records moves to Los Angeles, you have a whole other renaissance of music coming out of this label. And it continues its legacy, now never losing its connection to Detroit, not at all, but in a new environment in Los Angeles where we start to see not just music, but now we see films like Mahogany and Lady Sings the Blues, two of the great movies from that era, especially Lady Sings the Blues, the story of Billie Holiday, the great Diana Ross playing Billie Holiday. Just one of the great classic films. If you haven't seen it, you should. So in summary, this music, timeless. You know it because we heard you singing it last night at the rehearsals. You know the same songs as your parents and grandparents listened to. What does that tell me as a historian? It tells me simply this, that in a way, this music is almost like American folk music now, because the definition of American folk music is something that is sung and known by large amounts of people, the folks. Everybody knows that song. Everybody knows Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land. Well, everybody knows My Girl. Everybody knows that song. Everybody knows Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Tears of a Clown, Tracks of My Tears. These songs have embedded themselves into the American music treasury in such a way that A, they will always be there, and B, they will always be meaningful for my generation, your generation, and succeeding generations to come. So with that said, what I'd like to do now is really hear history from the people who made it instead of me just interpreting it. I'm going to turn it over to Berry Gordy, to Smokey Robinson, and also to John Legend. I'm going to ask them a couple of questions to get it going, and then I'm going to turn it over to you so you have the opportunity to do it as well. Okay? So let me start. That loan from your family that you took out to start Motown Records, it had to come from a dream, from you saw something that said, you know what, I want to do this. I'm going to need the money, but I got a dream. Talk about that.
Okay. First of all, hello everybody. It's great. It's great being here, and I'm so happy to be here and answer your questions and try to, because I look at you and I just bring back so many memories because I remember me at your age and even before. First, I'd like to say that I had a passion when I was 10 or 11 years old. And any kid who gets a passion that early and know what they're going to do in their lives, it's always helpful, you know. I saw, I heard on the radio at about that age that there was a superpower contest between the land of the free and Nazi Germany. It was Joe Louis versus Max Schmeling. And I sit around the radio, and America had won. Joe Louis was now, after knocking out Max Schmeling, he was a hero of all the people in the world, and he was black like me. And what a feeling I got, seeing my mother and father crying and the tears of joy and all these people. It was the biggest celebration you've ever seen. People ran out the house, and we went out, and the neighborhoods were packed, and people were screaming and singing and dancing. And I was this like 10-year-old kid, but my mother and father's tears really made me think to myself, you know, what could I ever do in my life that could make this many people happy? You know, so I had a passion then. And I started off as a boxer. That's what I was going to do, and I became a professional boxer and so forth. And, of course, I always loved music, and music was in my heart from the gospel in church and from here and the Mills Brothers and Nat King Cole as I grew up. And I never, ever dreamed I would be what I became in the music world and the record business. Because actually, to be honest, when I started off, all I wanted to do was make some music, make some money, and get some girls. You know, that was, you know, not necessarily in that order. Not necessarily in that order. And I, you know, that was it. It was fun for me, you know, start off, but that passion I had. And so it kind of started there. And when I got into music, I started writing about everything, you know, paper clips, this, that. I wanted to write great songs because actually, you know, I heard the Mills Brothers when I was very young. And they had a song called Paper Doll. I'm going to buy a paper doll that I can call my own, the doll that other fellas cannot steal, you know. And I thought, I said, what a great song. You know, guys are stealing my girls even before I get them, you know. And I could never get the girls I wanted. And so you know, the dance, I couldn't dance well enough. I couldn't do that, you know. And so eventually I started writing songs about that. Later in life, you know, I couldn't dance it well. And finally I learned to dance. And then I wrote a song called You Broke My Heart because I couldn't dance. You didn't even want me around. Now I'm back to let you know I can really shake them down. Do you love me? You know. And so, you know, so it went on from there. So it was a passion. And as I continued with my music, it was just great because when I started writing songs first, I felt misunderstood. I was like a teenager, you know, no one understood my thoughts and my dreams. And I wanted to write songs. And I wanted somebody to hear my songs. I wanted to be great like Joe Louis, but I wanted to write them, get the songs. And so I would talk to people about songs I was writing, and no one wanted to listen. So, you know, they would see me coming. I could see them out of my car, see me coming, and I'd see them running, you know, because they didn't want to hear, I got a song, you know, you want to hear this, you know. And so that was it. But one day, you know, I created this trick and this game plan. I said, wait a minute, these people don't want to listen to me. I think if I listen to their problems long enough, they will be too guilty not to listen to my songs. So I started listening to people, you know, and actually my plan worked. But it worked too well because I got hooked on people. Their stories fascinated me. It was great. They were telling me about their lives, and all of them mostly wanted to be somebody else, and they wanted to be. And one day to this woman, I blurted out, if you be yourself long enough, the right person will come along and love you for the right reasons. And she was like, oh, my goodness. And I said, oh, my goodness, did I say that? You know. And so then I wrote my very first song called You Are You. I told her, no, you are you. You know, you are you. That's all that matters to me. You are you, and only you can be the one I love and yearn for, the one that my heart burns for. Yes, you are you. That makes you best of all. My very first song. And then I learned something from that. I learned that I have to be myself. And that's what I want in part here is that as long as you are yourself, you know, you be yourself, you will find that you are like all these other people. As Bob said earlier, we're all one big family, and we are integrated now. And music started integrating people passionately before they got in, you know, intellectually. And so it's very important. We're all like the same. So I knew I was a normal kind of person. So anything I felt, I could write about it and know that you all would feel it too, because we're all the same, whether you were white, black, and that's why we got the thing, music for all people. You know, that's a long-winded thing for your answer for your question, but
it was right on.
I wanted to get it across. All right.
Smokey, at one time when you were visiting the Grammy Museum, you told a great story about the amount of talent just around your neighborhood and who you grew up with. Could you remember that story you talked about, Aretha Franklin and so many of the other artists that were living in Detroit in your neighborhood at the time?
Yeah, I actually grew up, Aretha Franklin, you mentioned her, so I'll talk about her first, but she lived right around the corner from me. I've known Aretha Franklin since I was probably 9 or 8 or 9, like that, and her brother and I were very, very, very close, and I met her, and when I first met Aretha, I had gone to his house. We were playing, and we went to his house. And their father was a minister in Detroit. He was one of the biggest ministers in the country, Reverend C.O. Franklin. So the neighborhood that I grew up in the hood. And, you know, it was like 2 blocks in the center of the hood that were for affluent people, just right in the middle. I mean, it was the strangest thing. I lived on a street called Belmont. And next to Belmont was a street called Boston Boulevard and a street called Arden Park right after that. and then the ghetto started again. So Aretha and her brothers, her father was, they were kind of well-to-do. And so they lived on Boston Boulevard. I'd go around the corner with Cecil, who was her brother, we were playing, and we go in his house, and I hear this voice coming from out of another room there. Piano's playing, voices singing. I could tell it was a young person singing by the voice, and piano's being played, so I thought somebody was in there either playing a recording by somebody with a young person singing, or there was another person in there playing the piano, because the piano was being played so well. And this young person was singing. And so we go in this room, and I'm standing, and I'm looking at it, and here's this little girl. And she's sitting there. She's playing the piano and singing, almost like she sings now. And it was just incredible to me, and I was just overwhelmed by seeing her. And it was Aretha. And so I met her at a very early age in life. And then 4 doors down the street from me, Diana Ross lived there. And we were kids together growing up on the same block, and I had a niece who, she and Diana were very, very, very close. And Diana used to come to our house. I mean, I was raised, my mom passed when I was 10, so I was raised by my oldest sister, who ended up having 10 kids of her own. So there was like 11 of us in the house. But it was great, because we didn't, we were poor, but we didn't know it, because everybody in the neighborhood was poor. And so Diana used to come down and spend the night at our house, because it'd be nothing for 30 kids to be at our house at one time, because our house was like the gathering place. And we were of all ages, so there were kids there of all ages at all times. My sister was everybody's mama. And so I've known Diana Ross since I was probably about 9 or 8 or whatever. And then there was a guy who was in the first group I was in. We ended up being the Miracles, but at that time we were called the Chimes. And there were a lot of groups in our neighborhood. In fact, like Barry was saying, the guys wanted to get together and sing so we could attract the girls. And so there was a guy in our group, his name was Pete. And next door to Pete, the Four Tops lived there. And right across, there was the biggest street running down the center of Detroit. It's called Woodward Avenue. And right across Woodward Avenue, we used to have what we call group battles, and the Temptations lived over there. And they were called the Primes at the time, and there were a lot of groups and groupettes in Detroit at the time, because they were the Primes, and the Supremes were the Primettes. And we turned out to be the Matadors, and then we had a sister group to our group called the Matadorettes. And it was a lot of that going on, but we used to battle each other in singing, and we always knew the Four Tops were then called the Four Aims, and we always did not want them to come, because we knew if they came, the best you were going to get was second place, because they were awesome even at that time. But all these people were like in the same neighborhood. And I want to point out something to you guys about something Bob mentioned earlier, that it is my belief that in every township, every city, every little village in the world, ratio-wise, there's the same amount of talent that was in Detroit. There's the same amount of talent that ratio-wise, this percentage of people in that particular place are talented people who can do what they do. And people have asked me many times, Smokey, why do you think all these talented people were there in Detroit, and Detroit happened to be like it was and all that stuff? And I have to tell them, now this man is my best friend. And fortunately for me, I met a man early in my life when I was a teenager that I could trust, and who was somebody who had a dream, who was about to make that dream come true. And I attached onto him just as he was about to make his dream come true. The reason that we had so many people in Detroit, or Detroit became what it became musically, is because we had Berry Gordy. See, we had a man who had a dream, who had the wherewithal to borrow $800 to start a record company, and get it going to the point whereas it became what it has become. I was telling Bob earlier today, it trips me out. I'm in the airport, and I'm in the airport right today or yesterday, and I'm in the airport, and a guy comes up to me and says, my brother, Smokey, I love you, man. I love your music. I'm from Tanganyika. My God. Never in my wildest dreams as a kid growing up that I think my music would be all over the world where somebody from his country would even know me, would even know my music, would even be able to say that. But it's all over the world. On the very first day of Motown, when we started Motown, he started Motown. He came to us. There were 5 people there. He said, I'm going to start this record label. And we are not going to just make black music. We're going to make music for everybody. We're going to make music for the world. We're going to make music that everybody can enjoy and listen to with some great beats and some great stories. And our quality is always going to be high. That was what he said to us. And that's what we set out to do. And he and I talk all the time. And in his wildest dreams at that moment, we never dared to dream that Motown was going to become what it has become. It has become world-renowned. It's become all over the globe. It's somewhere wherever I go in the world, people know the music. And it bridged so many gaps. When we first started out, there was no intermingling like you guys are now. And especially when we went to the South, we go and we do shows there, and they'd have a big stage in the middle of this big arena. And black people would be on one side, and white people would be on the other side, not even hardly looking at each other. Or black people would be upstairs and white people would be downstairs, or vice versa. And nobody was, they were just unto themselves. And a year or so later, we'd go back to those same places, and because the music was bridging those gaps, not only were they in the same area, they were dancing together. And you saw white guys with black girlfriends and black guys with white girlfriends. And it was just an amazing thing. And not only that, we were in a Cold War with Russia, whereas Russia was behind the Iron Curtain. Behind the Iron Curtain, and there was no communication. The only communication that we had with them basically was talking about who had the most weapons and who was the strongest and so on and so forth. And our acts were going to Russia. And they were coming back talking about how the people in Russia loved them. So it bridged not only racial gaps, but gaps between continents. And so I'm very, very proud of Motown and what it has become, and of this man for having that dream and starting it and making my dream be able to come true because of his dream.
John, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Obviously, you're not of this generation, but certainly you are a person that would be considered part of the Motown extended family simply because of the influence that Motown has had on your music. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really amazing listening to these stories because I think of my father and his brothers a lot. When I hear these stories that Mr. Robinson and Mr. Gordy are telling, because my father was born in 1949 in Springfield, Ohio, which is not too far south of Detroit, and it was a smaller version of what was happening in Detroit, because it's a town that's built around a couple auto factories. The black folks from there moved from the South, migrated there, and worked in factories. My dad was a auto worker himself, and his family grew up in a tight-knit black community where a lot of talent shows were happening, a lot of dance contests were happening, and the music that inspired them the most and the artists that inspired them the most were people like Smokey, people like the Temptations. And so my first exposure to Motown music was through my father and his brothers. They would gather around every Christmas and they would sing, the Christmas carols that the Temptations recorded and that Stevie recorded. They would sing "My Girl" and they would sing They would sing "Just My Imagination." They would sing all these songs, and my first exposure to those songs wasn't hearing the record; it was hearing my father and my uncle sing it around the piano, and so it was an amazing thing for me to learn that music through them, and that was part of what made me want to sing. I was around that all the time, and I was also in church listening to what was going on in church, and I had a lot of gospel music around me, and all of these influences were what made me who I am. And I particularly as a young person that sang and wrote songs and played the piano, was influenced by people like Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, because they kind of, after coming up through the Motown machine, they started to kind of go and do their own thing as kind of singer-songwriter artists. And that was kind of my model for how I would think about writing my own music. And I was heavily influenced by a lot of the work that Stevie did in the late 60s and the early 70s. And that Marvin did, of course, with What's Going On and some other records. And if you think about the breadth and the prolificness, I don't know if that's a word, but the just the amount of great music and great artists that have been so meaningful to several generations, I'm in awe just sitting here listening to the stories, because we are in the presence of greatness, we're in the presence of history, and you all should feel very privileged, because I feel very privileged to be here today.
Mr. Gordy, the amount of songs that Motown produced in the early to mid-'60s, it seemed to be one after another, almost as if it was an endless well that you were just drawing from in terms of songs and artists. And there, I had mentioned before this concept of the Motown sound. I said I thought how great it sounded on a car radio. But can you talk a little bit about how you created the sound? Because there certainly was a consistency to that sound.
Okay, well, the sound was done through love and competition, and we had all kind of rules. I had little philosophies that I'd learned from my father as a kid, and when I started the company, you know, I was more important in the people that were singing the songs than actually how talented they were. The first artist that I met after writing my Jackie Wilson stuff was Smokey Robinson. He was an audition for Jackie Wilson's manager, and I happened to be there writing songs, and he came in with the 4 guys and a girl, and they sung a thing called Mama Done Told Me, which I thought was a pretty good song, but not quite good enough to be a big hit. But at any rate, they were turned down by Jackie's manager. They said, "You guys are great, I like you all, but you got a girl in the group and you're too much like the Platters, so we can't use you, but thank you for coming." And I was sitting there writing songs, and I thought they were really good. And I kind of got up and followed them out. And they were very dejected. And I said to them, to Smokey, who was the last one in line, they walked out, and he was the last one, and I said, "Jackie Wilson's manager didn't like you, but I did." And he looked at me like, "So what?" You know, I mean, you know, he said, "Yeah, well, you liked her, so what? Who are you?" And so I said, "My name is Berry Gordy." And you said?
I said, "You mean Berry Gordy, who writes all those songs for Jackie Wilson?" And you said?
I know.
And then my lip dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe it, because I saw him sitting there, and he looked like he was probably about 18 or so sitting there, and I thought he was waiting to audition for Jackie Wilson's managers after we got done. And so he came out, and whenever I buy music, and Jackie Wilson as a kid growing up for me was my #1 singing idol. I mean, I would have walked 10 miles to see Jackie Wilson sing, because Jackie Wilson was the man when I was growing up. And so I had all of Jackie Wilson's records, and whenever I buy music, right today, I want to know who wrote the music, who created this music that these people are playing or singing. And I've always done that since I was a little boy. I used to, you know, I grew up hearing like sort of like I had 2 older sisters, and they played like jazz music, and first voices I heard were like Sarah Vaughan and Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra, Billy Eckstine, but the songs were being written by George Gershwin and Cole Porter and people like that. But I always wanted to know who wrote that music, and I was always like that. So I had all Jackie Wilson's records, and his name was on all the records. So when he told me he was Berry Gordy, I mean, I could not believe, how could this guy be Berry Gordy? And he told me he was Berry Gordy, and just took my breath away, but he was him.
You know, you talk about songwriting. There is a great story when when you told at the Grammy Museum about Tracks of My Tears, about how, and I thought maybe you should tell the kids how songs come to you, because the story of writing Tracks of My Tears and how that came to you is so not only inspirational, but it really sheds light on the songwriter's craft.
Well, I have to add something about him again. When he heard us, I've always tried to write songs all my life, and we had actually sung about 5 songs that I had written for this audition, because we thought that if we went there with our own material, then they would surely accept us, because these kids got their own material, you know. But none of my songs made sense all the way through. I could always rhyme stuff, you know what I mean? But I'll just give you an example. My first verse, I'm not going to rhyme it, but my first verse would be saying, "Oh, my darling, I love you so much. It is so good to have you here in my arms, and you just feel good to me." And the second verse will say, "I'll be glad when you come back, because I haven't seen you in 10 years, but I miss you so much." But it was all rhymed up, you know. And so one song, the one that he mentioned, he liked it. And that was what had him come out and talk to us about it, you know. But he taught me how to write my songs professionally. And one of the first things he said to me was, a song has got to be like a short book or a short movie or a short story where everything ties in together. You know, he said, you got 5 songs in one song. And so it's got to tie in together. It's got to have a beginning and a middle and an ending that tie in together. And even if you don't end it, you give people enough information so that their imaginations can end it for them. So that's how I grew up writing. So now I know as a songwriter, my approach to songwriting is, and incidentally, I was going to say, I have a song called "The Quiet Storm," and I love when I hear other people singing my music. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you played and sang "A Quiet Storm," and my God, man, please record that. Okay, so now, anyway, I have a philosophy as a songwriter. I know that there are no new words for the English language. If there are, I don't know them yet. They've just been made up. There are no new chords for the instruments that you play chords with, guitar, piano, whatever. There are no new notes for music. You've always got the same notes that have always been there since the beginning of music for America. So I really think that probably there are no new ideas. But for me as a songwriter, I know that I got to work within the framework of what's already there. So what my goal is to try to say, I love you, differently than it's ever been said. If I can say I love you in a way that means I love you, but nobody said that like that before, then I can be ahead of the game as a songwriter. So he asked me about the Tracks of My Tears. There's a guy who was my guitar, and incidentally mentioning Diana Ross. Diana Ross, when she moved away from our neighborhood and moved to the Brewster Projects, she went and she formed this group. They were still in high school, and they had 4 girls, and they called themselves, like I said, the Primettes. And she called me one day and said, "Hey, Smoke, I got this group, and I want to sing for you." And blah, blah. So they came to sing for me, and they had a guitar player with them. Now, the Miracles and I were going out on the road, and we didn't have any instruments with us whatsoever. We'd get to a little town, and we'd supposed to have a rehearsal before the show, the concert that night. And the only person that would be at the rehearsal would be the drummer for the band who was going to play for us. And so now the drums, they don't play the chords and all the stuff like that. So, but the drummer's there, and he would tell us, "Oh man, we know your music. You know, the piano player that go downtown, he'd take his old lady downtown and get a coat and all kind of stuff, you know." And so we get to the show that night. They would not know our music at all. They would just be playing something, and we'd be trying to sing. So Diana had a guitar player with her, a guy named Marv Tarplin. So I asked her, I said, can I use Marv to go out on the road with us, so in case we get to some of these places where the musicians don't know our music, he can just play with us. So she said, yeah. And I'll see her right there, and she said, "Smoke, what about my guitar player, man?" Because he never went back. He stayed with me for all those years. He is one of the most prolific music people that I've ever come across in my life. He and I have written so many songs together. Going to a Go-Go, the Tracks of My Tears, and Ain't That Peculiar, and Cruising, and all just down through the years, because he is so prolific musically. and he would play music riffs and give them to me on a tape, Tracks of My Tears being one of those. And I would listen to them until I could come up with an idea for it. So I had this music for the Tracks of My Tears, and I couldn't think of anything to go with that music. And finally, one day, I came up with the first line. I take a good look at my face, see my smile looks out of place. If you look closer, it's easy to trace that I miss you so much. Nah, it's easy to trace that you're gone and I'm here, and that's terrible. Nah, it's easy to trace that you don't love me anymore. No. One day I was in my car, and the thought came to me, what if a person had cried so much till if you got up on their face and looked at them closely, you could see tracks that their tears had left in their face. So that's how that song was born. That's why it became the Tracks of My Tears, because nobody had ever described crying like that. So that's where that came from.
You know, it's interesting. Some years ago, many years ago, Bob Dylan was being interviewed by the media, and somebody in the media asked him, who do you think's the best poet of the 20th century? And Bob Dylan said, Smokey Robinson. One of the highest, I think, regards to someone who was a poet himself, Bob Dylan. Last question for Barry, and then we'll open it up for the kids. But, you know, we talked about civil rights before, and clearly this music was a form of inspiration for people in the movement. You got involved in the movement. You knew Dr. King. There was almost a kind of a responsibility put on the music's shoulders, I think, as you go into the 60s, because so many people look for when they needed comfort and we needed encouragement and a sense of belief, and they look to Motown music. Can you comment on that?
Well, actually, you know, the civil rights movement was going very strong. I was a big fan of Dr. King, and obviously he was a big fan of Motown because he came there and he, you know, we put out 3 of his albums, you know. So I didn't know that he even knew who we were, but we were talking, and I learned so much from Dr. King. I started a new label called Black Forum, because while I didn't agree with everybody that was in the movement, I did agree with Dr. King, but I was always concerned about that turn the other cheek business, because I was like a fighter, you know, and I said, well, you mean, and I was talking to him one day because I had him under contract, and it was really great, you know, because I asked him, I said, what is this? You mean if somebody slapped me on one side of my face, I've got to turn my other cheek? I mean, what's that, you know, about? And so then he went to explain to me about the people in the world, and that's where I got a lot of my philosophies from, about all of us together, even though I knew a lot of stuff. But when he said it, he was saying the sameness in all of us is so much more powerful than the differences. And by turning the other cheek, you know, you give people a chance to think, and the good people an opportunity to come out and to join your movement. And I realized that, you know, and I agreed with him. Of course, I still don't turn the other cheek, but the point is this: I understand what his message was and why he was so successful, and that was it. So we had a Black Forum label, so not only Dr. King, but other activists could have a voice. You know, Elaine Brown and some of the Stokely Carmichael and some of the other people who had a view of what it was could do that. So that's we were very much kind of in that thing. And then when our artists went around the country spreading joy and love and music, Smokey and the other groups, we had a thing called the Motown Review, and they got down south and they were doing so well. And I think in Mississippi or somewhere right around there, they were shot at, you know. And some of the kids had not ever been out of Detroit. So I was so concerned to call Smokey and say, look, you got to get them back here now because, you know. And he said, no, we kind of want to stay out here because we're bringing so much joy and we can see things happening. We know it's, you know, it's a little dangerous, but we're trying to spread love, you know, and that's, we want to stay out. And I said, well, haven't you heard of Emmett Till, you know, the Klan, you've heard of them, you know. And he said, but we kind of want to do that. And so we only got 2 more dates, and so you have to trust me this time. And I said, okay. And of course, he kept them. They went out there and they continued, and people did fall in love with them, and which proves that there are more good people in the world than bad, but the bad talk louder and stronger and stuff like that. But so we had a lot of those kind of incidents, and they tell me great stories about when they came back and what happened and so forth. And so I'm just so proud of them, and I'm so proud to be here to talk about it. I'm so proud of the Motown legacy, and so the future generations can really kind of understand what that is, so I'm really happy with that.
Let's take some questions from the audience. I know some of you are representatives from different schools and communities. You had your hand up. Go ahead. Stand up and let's hear your question.
My name is Perry James.
Hold on.
My name is Perry James. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And I have a question for Smokey Robinson. You said when you were younger, you all have like singing battles and stuff. Like, how would you come across a person that you would want to be in your group? And like, when you assembled the group, like, did you all have like auditions or like, and like, it's like
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, Perry. Mostly the groups in those days were people that you grew up with. They were your friends. I think that what has happened with a lot of the groups that you see that come and go so quickly nowadays, because they are people who are put together from different cities and different places, and they don't really know each other until somebody decides, okay, I'm going to put these guys, because I see this guy over here, he's very talented, and this guy over here, and this guy over there, and they're very talented. I'm going to put them together and make me a group or make me a band and, promote them and so on and so forth. But those groups rarely ever last. The groups in our neighborhoods were people that we grew up with, people that we knew. We went to school with them. We went to, we knew them every day. They were our friends. And just so happens some of them could sing. So we got together, 4 or 5 of us, and formed groups. And that's how they were formed. Yeah.
Someone else. Yes, ma'am. Microphone.
My name is Maribel Garcia. I am with the Southeast Rio Vista YMCA in Los Angeles, and my question is directed to Smokey. Looking back on your career before you became a Hall of Fame honoree, what were some of the struggles that you faced as a young kid trying to pursue a career in the music industry?
I think that the main struggle was to be heard. It was just to find somebody, like Barry was saying, to listen. And fortunately for me, and I say this because another reason that Barry started Motown was because he would produce records on us. And he had 3 or 4 other artists. And produce records on all of us, put them with other record companies, and nobody was paying us. It was back in the day when, they would pay you if they wanted to. If they didn't, they didn't. And that was it, So fortunately, I met him. See, everybody doesn't meet a Berry Gordy. But fortunately for me, I did. And I met a man that I could trust who started this record label so people could be paid. And whatever you earned, you would get it. And because he was in it before I was, and he was used to people not paying him for what he was doing. So I guess that pissed him off. So he wanted to start something where young people who spread their creativity and stuff like that, or who were creative, could come and hone their crafts. And if they had hit records and like that, they could be paid for them. So that was my main struggle, to find a place, a home, where I could be heard and benefit from it.
In the back there? Yes, ma'am. Hold on. Let the microphone get there.
You mentioned finding someone who helped you, Barry Gordon, but Gordy, sorry. But if we don't find someone like that who we can look up to in our lives, can you give kids one piece of advice that they can take and use to follow their dreams with?
Well, you know what? The world has changed so much since that time. And one of the greatest musical vehicles that has ever happened in the history of music is American Idol. Okay? I am a real advocate for American Idol. American Idol is a place where kids can go, and you can go if they come to your, because they're going to come to your city or your town to audition people. The people, one of my favorite parts of American Idol is just to watch the auditions on television, to see the people. Some of the people who audition, I mean, I don't mean to make it comical, but it is. It's like they come from a place where nobody has ever heard them. Their parents, none of their friends, nobody would say, hey man, no, you be a doctor. You be a grocer or something, you know, because, but there's a comedy to it. However, those people that I'm talking about right now are seen by millions of people all over the world at once. So a lot of them come away with fan bases before they've even been in a recording studio or anything like that. So there are places or avenues like that for you now that we did not have, and or you just have to be fortunate enough to find somebody that you can trust who will boost you.
I'm of the mind that anybody with talent, persistence, tenacity, perseverance, because a lot of times people have the talent, but they don't have the follow through. A lot of times people have the follow through, but they don't have the talent, you know. But if you have all that together, you will be discovered. You will find a way. You will meet the right people that will be able to help you.
And I want to add to that too. No never stops. No never stops in show business. Okay, you look at John and you look at me and you think, well, okay, we got these great careers going, and nobody ever says no to us. Nobody says, no, I can't use you for this. You know, it never stops. So you got to be able to, when you get knocked down, to get back up and keep on stepping. And in order to do that, you got to love it. You got to love it. You got to love it when you're tired. You got to love it when you're sick. You got to love it through everything, every emotion that you can possibly go through. You got to love it.
You know, we've been talking about music now for the past hour. I think now is the time maybe to hear some. So I'm going to ask Mr. John Legend to step at the piano and do us the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, John Legend.
My favorite Motown artist is a man by the name of Stevie Wonder. No offense, Smokey. I'm gonna do a song of his. This is the first song I ever learned of his that I tried to cover when I was a kid. It's called Love's in Need. Good morning or evening, friends. Here's your friendly announcer. I have serious news to pass on to everybody. What I'm about to say could mean the world's disaster, could turn your joy and laughter to tears and pain. You know that love's in need of love today. So don't delay, send yours in right away. You know that hate's going round, breaking many hearts. Oh, so stop here, please, before it's gone too far. a force of evil plans to make you his possession. And it will, if you let it, destroy everybody. We all must take precautionary measures. Enjoy and peace your treasure. Then you hear me when I say, you know that love's in need of love today. Oh, don't delay. Send yours in right away. You know that hate's going round, breaking many hearts. Oh, so stop here, please, before it's gone too far. Love's in need of love today. Hold on, delay, send yours in right away. You know that hate's going round, breaking many hearts. So stop it, please, before it's gone too far. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Oh, what we need is love.
John Legend. You know, before we go, I think I have one more special guest for you. Please put your hands together and welcome Nick Jonas and John Taylor.
Hello. Quick little surprise performance. I'm going to be singing this song later on tonight, and this is a good little try run, so I hope you appreciate all that Motown is. I know I do, and it's been a big part of my life and my journey as a musician. I'm going to sing my favorite song from that right now. But I need you to clap your hands with me if you can. Hey! Sugar pie, honey bunch. You know that I love you. I can't help myself. I love you and nobody else. In and out my life, you come and you go, leaving just your picture behind. And I've kissed it 1,000 times, yeah. When you snap your fingers or wink your eye, I come running to you. I'm tied to your apron strings, and there's nothing that I can do. Hey, ooh, oh, yeah. I can't help myself. No, I can't help myself. Sugar pie, honey bunch. I'm weaker than a man should be. I can't help myself. I'm a fool in love, you see, yeah. Wanna tell you I don't love you, tell you that we're through. And I've tried, but every time I see your face, I get all choked up inside, yeah. When I call your name, girl, it starts a flame burning in my heart, tearing it all apart. No matter how I try, my love I cannot hide. Oh, sugar pie, honey bunch, you know that I'm weak for you. I can't help myself. I love you and nobody else. Ooh, ooh.
Let's hear it for Nick Jonas. Come on. John Taylor. Wow, what an hour. So we've come to the end of our program, but before we leave, I just want to make sure that everyone here appreciates the talent and the generosity and also the great stories and the words of advice from Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, John Legend. Please put your hands together one more time.
Ladies and gentlemen, the First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Michelle Obama, accompanied by 9-time Grammy Award winner John Legend, Motown legend, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and Lifetime Achievement recipient Smokey Robinson, the man who created Hitsville, USA, Motown founder Berry Gordy, and executive director of the Grammy Museum, Robert Santelli.
Well, isn't this exciting? Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, hello, everyone. It is great to have you all here today. This is really good. Let me start by recognizing the 3 or 4 gentlemen who have joined me on stage. Our dear friend John Legend, who has just been amazing in so many ways. Mr. Smokey Robinson, who needs no introduction, who has been such a dear friend. Mr. Berry Gordy, who just is. And Mr. Bob Santelli from the Grammy Museum, who's going to get us started. Thank you. Thank you all so much. It means so much to us. I know it means so much to all these students to have you here to spend this kind of quality time. This doesn't happen often. You do realize that. Not only getting these gentlemen on the stage together, but the fact that you all have this kind of access, and you're sitting where? In the White House. That's something else. But of course, I want to thank all of you, all the students, for coming out today. I'm excited when I am talking to young people. We were all sitting where you were at some point in time. If you can believe that. We were teenagers once. Not so fun. We were. We went to some of the same high schools that you all did. We went to schools like you. We carried around backpacks. We didn't have computers and iPods, but, you know, we talked to each other on the phone every now and then. We had to dial with the rotary dial, but things were a little different. But we liked to hang out with our friends. We were into music. You know, I even used to know what the latest dances were and taught my brother. I don't know that now, but we had homework to do, and sometimes our parents embarrassed us like we now embarrass our children. And growing up, we all had our own dreams, and that's what today is about. It's about the dreams of kids who grew up knowing that they had a song to sing and that everyone will want to hear that song. And it all started with Mr. Gordy. In 1960, he was a young man in Detroit with a great idea. He wanted to be one of the very first African Americans to own a record label. So he got an $800 loan from his family. They owe you big time, right? and started recording music out of his apartment. And soon he bought a house to record from, and it became home to some of the most popular musicians in the country, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations, the Supremes, the Jackson 5, the Four Tops, Marvin Gaye, Gladys Knight, and the Supremes. The Gladys Knight will be here soon as well. And one of my personal favorites, I say this all the time, who's my favorite? Stevie Wonder. Neither Mr. Gordy nor Smokey Robinson were born into greatness or wealth. Diana Ross grew up in a housing project. And John Legend is the son of a seamstress and a factory worker. And they're good people. But they've shown us that with enough hard work and a willingness to take some risks, anyone can make it. And this isn't just true for careers in entertainment or sports. The Motown story is really a metaphor for life. So whatever your passions are, whether it's business or law or science, teaching, social services, with dedication and focus, there is truly nothing that you all can't do. And if you ever doubt that, just look up on this stage for a second and remember what you can do. So what I'm asking you all to do now is to really take full advantage of this opportunity, because I'm going to turn the stage over to these individuals who are going to make themselves available to you. So I want you all to ask questions. You don't seem like a shy bunch, so, but take full advantage, ask questions, and find out about how they reached their dreams so that you can figure out some strategies for reaching yours. Don't be shy, ignore the cameras. Hopefully, I don't know if they're leaving or not, but if they stay, just ignore them. And make sure you get all that you can from these men. And I'm going to leave because I got other stuff to do. But I am so grateful to all of you for taking the time, not just to be here this evening, but doing this, because this is really what it's all about. It's not this evening's performance. It's what, because you all are coming from all over the country, from schools all over the country, and of course from my hometown, Chicago. We've got some of my neighborhood schools. We got DuSable and Kenwood and Hyde Park. I'm not going to go into it because I'm going to leave out a few, but we are so excited to have you all here. And I also understand that you're going to get to stay a little bit and see some of the performance as well. So hopefully this is an exciting visit to Washington for you. It is a thrill for us to have you here. When we moved to this house a couple of years ago, we wanted to open these doors as wide as we could, especially for young people like you. And this music series is one of the ways that we're doing that. We have held workshops for all different types of music, classical, country. We've done some jazz, we've done some Broadway, we've even done some music from the civil rights movement. We did that last February for Black History Month. It was a wonderful event. And we did something for modern dance, so we're starting to move into other genres as well. We do all this because we believe that the People's House shouldn't be just a nickname. We believe that prime ministers and VIPs shouldn't be the only ones who feel comfortable walking through these doors. We feel that everyone should feel like they belong here, sitting right here in the state dining room. And I hope you realize through this experience that no one here is any different than you all are. Whether that's Smokey Robinson or John Legend or me or my husband, because we are all reflected in you. We see ourselves in you. I say that all the time. Yes, indeed. And as Motown rose, so did the forces of change in this country. During that time, it was the time of King and Kennedy. It was the time of marches and rallies and groundbreaking civil rights laws. And Motown's music was so much more than just a soundtrack. It was a heartbeat. As one of the members of the Four Tops once said, Back in the 60s, when we weren't allowed to go certain places, our music crept into people's homes, into their living rooms, their kitchens, their cars. Motown helped pave the way for people in this country to look at one another a little differently. Because something changed when little girls all across the country saw Diana Ross on the Ed Sullivan Show. There was a change that happened. Something changed when teenagers turned up the volume on the Temptations song, no matter where they lived, in Birmingham or Boston, in Detroit or Denver. Motown made music for all people, no matter what you look like, no matter where you came from. And that is why we are so proud, my husband and I, to share Motown's story as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. See, the people that we're going to be talking about, that we're going to hear from, that we're going to listen to, the songs, the music, these are true trailblazers. Because as you know, there wouldn't be an Usher if there wasn't a Smokey Robinson. You know, there wouldn't be an Alicia Keys without a Gladys Knight. But the thing that I want you all to remember is that nobody's name is printed on the Billboard Top 10 at birth. Nobody is born into this.